Now you're kind of like me in the sense that you grew up a hardcore pro wrestling fan. I mean, I grew up, I watched everything and then was able to make it into a living for myself, similar to what you attempted to do as well with Jerry Park and covering pro wrestling. And then you got to work with Spike, where you kind of got to see kind of firsthand some of these performers. Where did the bloom kind of come off the rose for you?
Yeah, it was exactly then. When I got to hang out a few times backstage at TNA events while working for Spike, it was a very eye-opening experience for many reasons. I got to see how messed up certain wrestlers are, not naming names, but guys who clearly needed a lot of help to get by day to day because they're in so much pain. It was very strange for me to see 40-year-old men dressed like that, walking around, and when you see them on TV for some reason, it looks right, but then when you see them walking in these strange outfits, and there were some weird gimmicks back then at TNA, it was just like, what are these guys doing? Like, have they grown up? You know, it was weird, and it left me with a sour taste. I actually, because I developed this relationship with Kurt Angle, he wanted me to join the TNA creative team. This is like 3 years ago, and he was pushing for it. I think because I went to Syracuse, and Brian Gewirtz, who was a writer on Raw, I believe he still is on the creative team at WWE. I think he saw some similarities because Brian also went to Syracuse, so he was pushing TNA to hire me. I talked briefly with Jeff Jarrett about it over email, and then some guy called me from Nashville and was a huge a-hole. Can I say that? Yeah. He was just so mean to me and so rude to me, and pretty much said the only reason why we're calling you is because Kurt wouldn't stop bothering us about this, and just tried to find a reason why he shouldn't hire me. And I was like, wow, these guys are shady. So that left me with a sour taste in my mouth, and you know, after that, a few things happened along the way, but that was the first time where I was like, wrestling isn't as cool as I thought it was, and it just, ever since that moment, I just haven't viewed it in the same light.
And you're not the only one right now. Like, we look at the pay-per-view numbers for both WWE and TNA. I mean, they're losing a lot of ground right now. Some feel that the UFC is playing a huge factor into that. Others are adamant that it's two separate entities. I think mixed martial arts has definitely bid in a lot to pro wrestling, but at the same time, it seems that pro wrestling is almost cannibalizing itself, and I think they've put themselves in this box where people like you, who was ordering the TNA weekly pay-per-views, you don't get much more hardcore than that. Now you're not watching anymore. I think that's a glaring example of an audience they've lost.
Not only am I not watching it, I watch it from time to time, and I can't remember why I liked it because it is so bad now. And you're right. A lot of people like to say that MMA is hurting pro wrestling, maybe even boxing to a degree, and there is some truth to that, but I think those sports or those forms of entertainment are hurting themselves. I think there's so many problems with pro wrestling. If you just want to talk about pro wrestling, there are too many shows, too many pay-per-views. Who wants to buy, you know, a $50 pay-per-view once every 3 weeks? What do the matches mean? When I liked wrestling, and even during the Attitude Era, the matches meant something. We were emotionally invested in these guys. And now it's just, they're just throwing it out there and expecting, you know, the fans to buy it. It's not the same. I wish they would actually go back to just 4 pay-per-views a year, and then those things would mean something. Those matches would mean something. But now when they have, you know, they've got what they have, Raw, SmackDown, NXT, there's way too much stuff, and they've introduced other shows along the way. So I totally agree. They are hurting themselves, and sure, you could point to MMA, but they need to look at themselves because they're doing a lot of things wrong.
Now, when we go back, though, to that late 90s boom, I mean, you talk about, like, overexposure, and at that time we were still getting, you know, WWF, WCW, ECW were throwing out pay-per-views every month, but I think with those products, you had 3 very distinct products. You had much more personalities, I felt, that came out there, and there was just an overall more of an interest level, whereas now, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing you're putting out so much, but it's not a product that people are interested in, no matter if it's 1 pay-per-view a month or it's 3 pay-per-views a month.
Yeah, and not to point fingers at anyone, I don't even think the matches are believable anymore. Like, I was watching yesterday, I've never been a John Cena fan. I never got the appeal, but, you know, much props to him. The guy's flying around, he's doing this. It looks like The Rock, you know, it looks like the exact same thing that we saw a few years ago, and it's not believable. I mean, now that MMA is so popular, I would love to see them use elements of that sport. Why do people love MMA so much? To a degree, it's real, right? There's this element of surprise. We don't know what's going to happen when we purchase a show. But the days of a guy getting punched and then all of a sudden being okay and then jumping around and flying around, it doesn't appeal to me anymore because I'm exposed to this thing that kind of looks like pro wrestling but is real and it's rugged, and it's, like I said, it's always a surprise. You never know what's going to happen. Like the Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva fight. You know, who could have predicted it to unfold that way? In wrestling, you know, the run-ins and this and that. Like, I don't want to see that anymore. Use what is going right for MMA and try to adapt it to your sport. The same way MMA and the UFC specifically looked at boxing, took the elements of boxing that worked, took the elements of boxing that didn't work, ignored those, tried to fix them, and look what they have now, a pretty solid product. Also, they took elements from pro wrestling that worked. It's okay to copy when it works, and I think pro wrestling, and I hear Vince McMahon isn't a fan of the UFC, he needs to start watching that product because he's going to be left in the dust if he doesn't start adapting.
I think it's frustrating for some fans that they're looking at this very, very successful UFC model and looking at why it can't work for professional wrestling. And I think certain elements you can take from mixed martial arts, you especially see in the countdown shows where you might focus on a guy like Chael Sonnen, where the average person tuning in is not interested in this guy because he was an elite level wrestler in college or because of his win-loss record. This is a guy who's a very, very engaging personality. He can talk up a fight. He's stating that he's going to beat this guy Anderson Silva and he's going to do it at this pay-per-view. It's a very, very basic story he's telling, but you're letting this guy just be himself and turn it up on television. Yeah. And I don't feel that when I tune into the WWE, where you're getting words put into certain guys' mouths, and these personalities are just kind of just being blended into a product.
And at the end of the day, Chael Sonnen made us want to watch him fight. And I don't think that even, let's just say they give the wrestlers, you know, scripts. Let's just say they help them build their personalities. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't ever want to watch them. You know, I can't remember, when was the last time? I think the last time I really cared about a pro. I can't even remember. Like, I remember the One Night Stand pay-per-view. I think that was the last pay-per-view that I ever purchased. I bought the first two, but the first one was fantastic. And even in that pay-per-view, I mean, a lot of those matches that they put together, there was no storylines going into it. I mean, there were a couple of things beforehand, but those were great matches. You know, and I just don't think that the matches mean anything, and they're just not believable. They're not exciting, and we're not emotionally invested into these characters like we were maybe 10 or so years ago.
For you and I mean, we're relatively similar in age. I mean, when we were coming up in high school and the boom period was on, and you know, wrestling was at a great peak at that point. We were watching guys like Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero. You look back at this time that you had reserved in your mind as this great period in wrestling, and now you look at like these guys who have died, and like, at what point did wrestling, it was somewhat depressing when you would tell your other friends that you're following this. And I think that's something that it's affected the hardcore audience more so than just the casual audience that comes and goes.
I agree. It's very dirty. You know, like you find out about Lance Cade. You know, this guy who was never a huge superstar, but, you know, a guy who I guess had potential, and he dies at, what, 29 years old? I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's dirty. It's like, what are you supporting now? You know, guys are dying every year. Nothing's being done to help them. They travel, let's say, 200 days a year. Look at their physiques. It's almost impossible to look that good if you're traveling that much. I mean, there's this cycle, you know, guys like Roddy Piper have talked about it, this cycle, the sickness, all that stuff. And you start to wonder, what am I supporting? Another thing that affected me greatly was the Chris Benoit thing. I mean, it's like, this guy became this way largely part of the bumps that he was taking in wrestling. How can I support this? You know, I was sitting there watching this, and then he murdered his wife and his child. You know, you feel dirty, and it just doesn't make you feel good about being a pro wrestling fan.
Is it somewhat interesting for you coming up through wrestling and, you know, following guys, whether it be Paul Heyman's booking, Steve Austin is one of the top stars in the WWE, Jim Ross, the voice of the WWE. You've interviewed all these guys recently, and they're all now moving over, and they're getting their fix out of mixed martial arts, and especially The Rock, a guy who made his entire fame through the WWE, stating had he had the choice, he would have gone that direction.
Yeah, it's bizarre, but it kind of makes me think that there is some method to my madness, that I'm not the only one who recognizes this, and I could see the passion, like when I talked to Stone Cold and Jim Ross after Brock's win at UFC 116, you could see the passion in their eyes and how much they wanted to talk about it. Like, they were very excited to talk about MMA, and that's cool, and it's surreal for me. When I was talking to The Rock, I asked him to do the eyebrow because I really would have, you know, been mad at myself had I not asked him. I was a huge fan of these guys, and just to get the opportunity to talk to them, and I've gone to talk to so many people, like, you know, Paul Heyman, these guys, I truly respected these guys. Never in a million years did I think I would ever be, you know, on any sort of level with them where they knew who I was. Bill Goldberg came up to me after that interview and said he watches my stuff. That's mind-boggling to me. I mean, I've watched these guys for so many years, read their books, and I was just a fan. And the fact that they know who I am, and you know, even people like you and Morrow and people who, you know, Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan, people who I consider my peers, for them to know who I am and to respect my work, I can't even describe what it means to me. It means a lot.